morning, Athens, and welcome to Education Matters, the official voice of the youth. Education Matters is sponsored by the Clarke County School District. Better together, the Clarke County School District. Ellison's Professional Services. When you get your income taxes done this year, go with who you know. Ellison's Professional Services, and your local internet station, MeU Radio Athens. Check us out at meuradioathens.com. My name is McKenna Mincy, and joining me in the studio are my co-hosts,
Samaya Stone,
Destiny Walker.
And today on Education Matters, we are with Mr. Bryon Shuenerman, and we will be discussing budgeting and financials within our very own Clarke County School District. But before we get into that, we're going to have our words to grow on by Destiny.
How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world, by Annie Frank.
All right, thank you so much for that, Destiny. Just getting right into it. I'm sorry, I did not mention your title. You are the Chief Financial Officer for Clarke County School District. Let's get that, the Chief Financial Officer. So just getting into it. Before you came here, what did you do before? What is your background? Tell us your story.
Sure thing. Before I get into it, I'd just like to thank you guys for the opportunity. This is the first time I've ever done something like this, and I have to apologize in advance. I'm an accountant by nature, so I'm much more comfortable behind a computer screen than I am on a mic or on a television show or anything of this nature. So if I start boring you guys got to lighten it up with something. So my background, I originally started off with a secondary math education degree. In college, I went to Berry College in Rome, Georgia. Shortly thereafter, I moved to Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii for a couple of years, never ended up teaching. I worked at the front desk of a hotel for a little while, very good experience. Moved to England, actually lived in England for a year, and then when I moved back, it was kind of right at the downturn of the economy, the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. I painted houses for a couple of years before going back to school, and I ended up going back to school for accounting. My mom was an accountant, and it was a pretty solid choice for her. I know that she always had a job. So one thing you can kind of bank on, accounting, solid career choice. There's always going to be options for you. So I kind of looked at that in the downturn of the economy. I went back, got my master's degree in accounting. It took about a year and a half. My first job outside of school was with the Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts, and we audited school systems just like Clarke County. We audited UGA. I audited UGA about six or seven times, and other government agencies. So doing the rounds, I got to know other chief financial officers, other people in the industry in the state. Actually got to know my predecessor, Larry Hamill, who was the chief financial officer before me. So I was an auditor with the state for, I think, about 6.5 years. My first job after auditing was with Baldwin County. I was their chief financial officer for almost 3 years before I took the job here. So that's kind of a roundabout background for myself and how I ended up at Clarke County.
All right, really quickly, I want to go back to, you mentioned a lot of places that you've traveled, and I kind of perked up when you said Berry College, because I'm going to Berry College this summer for GHP, so I got excited. I was like, woo. But back to this traveling, how do you think that spending time in all of these different places kind of helped you build the mindset that you have today?
I guess I liken it to really opening up your perspective, right? I went to high school in Cherokee County. From there, in college, I actually had the opportunity to play soccer at Berry College, and had an experience many different cultures there. So we had a player from Scotland. I think there were 3 from England. We had some, I think 3 or 4 from Germany, several from Dominican Republic. So it was kind of like this meld of many different nationalities and cultures, and it was very interesting just getting to know people, not only outside of Georgia, but outside of our country. And I really think that experience really opened my eyes to the way people think, the way people think outside of the United States. And I guess, it led me into traveling afterwards, kind of assisted in that process. Definitely going to Hawaii, I mean, it was a vastly different experience, as you can imagine, from living in Georgia your whole life. Very different experience. Yeah.
Did developing this sense of open-mindedness really early help you when you did go into this financial career?
I think that's a challenging question, and I don't know if I've always had that open-mindedness or if it was developed based off of experience. I mean, maybe it could have been a combination of both, but certainly it helped, yes.
Love that. My next question is your background in auditing. I know that there have been, you've heard some rumblings of a couple of audits happening with different things in Clarke County School District. Does that background allow you to kind of nip some things in the bud, for lack of a better term, when it comes to how things should be done in a certain way when working within the financial office of Clarke County School District?
I guess when you hear the term auditor or you're coming in and getting audited, it's scary, right? And I feel like having that experience, being an auditor, it gives you the confidence to deal with them. I kind of know what they're looking for, know what they're going to be testing, and I can kind of answer their questions before they even have them. So it's all I can say is it really gives you the knowledge to know what they're looking for and kind of stave off any problems before it ever happens.
And what is it that people are looking for when they're coming to audit?
So there's all different types of audits, right? Specifically, the audits that I'm speaking of are financial statement audits. So they're coming in, they're looking at your controls. What kind of controls do you have over cash or expenditures, making sure that you're not having fraudulent expenditures. What kind of separation of duties do you have? And all the different processes that go into operating an organization, and then finally on the back end preparing a set of financial statements that's accurate.
And going from actually being the person checking all of these things to making these things actually be in that order, what was that transition like for you, and how are you, actively making sure that things are in decency and order?
Through auditing, you kind of see the finished product. You see how all of the different operations, the expenditures, the payroll, the revenues that are coming in, the state grants, the federal grants, how all this operates in unison. And then on the back end, testing how all those activities took place, what it should look like, and then what it produces in terms of financial statements. So I came from a very comfortable place of knowing what those financial statements looked like. And then stepping into a CFO role, it was almost learning the other aspects of, being over finance in a school system, all the other idiosyncrasies. I knew what it had to look like on the back end, and it was almost like reverse engineering, figuring out what happens on the front end in order to have those final set of financial statements at the end of the year.
Which was the most difficult for you?
I think people. People and personalities, for sure. When you're looking at accounting, it's all pretty much crystal clear. It operates on rules. You've got your comfort zone, you've got literature that kind of backs up your decision making. But then when you actually step into a role where you have to consider, other people's, I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this. Differing opinions, right? And I think in accounting, it's really black and white. When you step into a leadership role, it's not always black and white, right and wrong. And that is one thing I appreciate about accounting is typically there's a right and wrong answer, but then you go in, you try to put that in place in financial leadership, and that's not always the case. So that to me has been a challenging step stepping into this role.
Speaking of which, can you really just lay out for our audience what exactly a chief financial officer does and what your department does for the Clarke County School District.
Sure. So I'm over accounting, obviously. The budgeting process. We also have payroll. I'm over payroll. Accounts payable. We want to make sure that all the bills are paid on time. Purchasing and contracts. So anytime we want to go out and make a contract for purchasing, let's say, food or supplies or any kind of equipment, we've got somebody that coordinates all those expenditures, make sure that we're getting the best price, the best deal on that kind of stuff. We've got about anywhere between $30 and $60 million grants on an annual basis that are state and federal. So we've got 2 grant accountants that deal with those that are also in my shop. And then all of our assets at Clarke County, think about all of our school buildings, all of our school buses, all of our laptops, all of our devices. There's on an annual basis, you got to make sure that you're keeping track of all that stuff. So we kind of coined that controllables and capitalized assets, and keeping track of that asset inventory is all under my shop as well. So Chief Financial Officer, you're really looking at anything that deals with money or assets, and kind of overseeing the various processes that are involved financially.
Okay, since you're in control, like you said, money and assets, how is the budget for the Clarke County School District determined?
I've got a question for you before we dig into the budget. Because this is a very interesting topic for high schoolers and middle schoolers to be interested in. So before we get started, I was kind of curious just to gauge your interest level and what your understanding is of the budget process in general. Where do you think our revenues come from? What do you think the size of the revenues are?
Honestly, I feel like revenue, I really don't know. I feel like some of it might come from taxes, and then other portions I'm not too sure about.
That's good. Anybody else?
Before we get into that, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and you will get our other co-host answers when we come back. Welcome back to Education Matters. You are still here with McKenna Mincy,
Samaya Stone,
And Destiny Walker.
and we are still here with Mr. Bryon Shuenerman, who is Chief Financial Officer for the Clarke County School District. And right now, we are trying to get our answers together for this question that he's posed for us about where revenue comes from in Clarke County. But before we get into that, we're going to have our Word of the Week by Samaya.
Thank you. The word of the week for this week is effervescence. The definition of effervescence is an appealingly lively quality. The use in the sentence is an actress admired for her energy and effervescence. And that has been your word of the week for this week. But I was answering your question before we went on break. You asked where revenue comes from in CCSD. Gotta answer it. Taxes and grants. And when I say taxes, state taxes, federal taxes, all kinds of taxes and grants, because you spoke about grants earlier on in the last segment.
Good. For the most part, that's correct. You know, it doesn't matter if it's federal revenue, if it's state revenue. The vast majority of our the revenue that we receive is tax derived one way or another. Right? Yep. So, second, do I have a guess of how much revenue we receive at CCSD on an annual basis?
Annually, every year. All right. Matt,
Are we
you
gonna
got a
play?
guess?
Are we gonna do it like a hot and cold type thing?
Yeah, you want to do it like
Or-
that, hot and cold?
Sure, however you.
All right, Matt, throw the first number out there.
So I'm gonna go ahead and go strongly with a 10 million.
Freezing.
This, you got a number?
20,000.
Oh, okay.
32 million.
All of y'all are freezing.
We're freezing.
We're
All of
freezing.
y'all are
We have
freezing.
how much higher do we need to
One
go?
more time. Increase it by about tenfold.
Oh, 10. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Ooh.
What about 500 million? Too high?
Too high? Question mark?
That's too high. So I'll just jump in there. It's about last year was $243 million.
Oh.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. That's
That,
yeah.
oh, that's a big number though. You know,
Yep.
we were really low.
Very
So
cool.
we want to break that down, we've got several different sources. We've got property taxes, like you mentioned, roughly 93.6 million of the revenue that we received came from property taxes. We also receive SPLOST money, so anywhere between $2 million to $2.5 million on average per month. And you'd be surprised, a lot of times that fluctuates, whether it's a game day weekend or if we got multiple game day weekends in a month. Our SPLOST revenue could be up almost $4 million per month. Other than that, so I talked about our local money that comes from sales taxes and property taxes. We also have a state stream of revenue. It's called our QBE allotment, which is our Quality Basic Education Formula. Last year we got $66 million from the QBE formula. And then on top of that, we also have federal grants. All of our school food program is paid for out of a federal program. We've got Title I, and just recently we've got CARES Act, which is the ESSER funds. So we've got CARES Act 1, CARES Act 2, as well as ARP. And anywhere between, last year it was $38 million, this year it's probably going to be a little bit more than that. So those federal programs add another $30 to $60 million per year. So for total last year was $243 million. This upcoming year, it's probably going to be closer to the $250 million mark.
Okay. What is SPLOST?
SPLOST, Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax. It's something that is voter approved, so it's got to go out for a vote once every 5 years. The most recent vote voters approved was in November of 2021, and it's SPLOST 6. So amongst the more significant projects, right off the bat, we're building a new Clarke Middle School. So how much do you think a middle school costs?
Ooh, we're playing hot and cold with this one too.
Okay, so
We're
in the
talking Clarke Middle right
we're
now.
closer to 200 millions
That's our
for the
overall.
the whole thing.
Yep,
I'm
So
gonna give
for
you
a middle school,
10 million.
that's a good guess.
All right,
Very good.
it's good.
it's good.
It could be better.
All
It
right.
could be better.
Okay. All right.
Let's go 20.
Good. Yeah, I would probably estimate anywhere between $25 and $30 million for any middle school.
Okay. So we're talking about like the renovation, since we're talking about Clarke Middle School being renovated. Are there any other schools on the CCSD that are being renovated or remodeled, maybe?
I don't
Besides
want to
Clarke?
misspeak, but whenever you've got we talked about SPLOST, right? So it's approved by the voters, and it is approved for 5 years worth of 1 penny sales tax. So on every dollar that you spend in Clarke County, 1 penny of it is taxed, and it comes back to the school system. So depends on what the voters approve, but right now in our the referendum, it is building schools, it's outfitting with technology, any type of equipment, transportation is on there as well. So it's kind of a meld of many different things, typically capital expenditures, so not operational expenditures like salary and benefits, or typical supplies, stuff of that nature. It's more big ticket items like building a school or renovating a school that are eligible to be paid for out of the SPLOST.
Okay, you talked about how SPLOST is like voted on for like 5 years, correct? Does the budget process work in that kind of way as well? Is it looked upon even as annually budget is renewed? Is it looked upon like that as well?
That's a very good question, very astute. The SPLOST budget operates a little bit differently. Once you have the 5 years SPLOST, you've got 3 tiers of projects. So you've got tier 1 projects, which are your big projects. We're typically funded by bond sales, almost like getting a mortgage on a home. You're selling bonds, which we're getting ready to do actually next month. We're selling $75 million of bonds to go ahead and pre-fund the building of schools. So when organizing a SPLOST budget, you're looking over the course of the 5 years and saying, okay, how do we have to tier our projects? And the big ticket items, those big schools are typically front-loaded on the SPLOST docket, so those are considered Tier 1. Tier 2 stuff is usually those renovations of schools that aren't quite as expensive as building a brand new school. And then finally on the back end, where we are with SPLOST 5 currently, we're looking at Tier 3 type projects, you know, stuff that is in a much smaller range, typically under $1 million projects, so you can kind of fit in with whatever revenue you still have left from that SPLOST.
So how far are we into the budget without SPLOST?
So the budget process that I do on an annual basis is general fund, so it's a completely different budget than SPLOST. So SPLOST operates on a 5-year budget. You know, you've got your different tiers of projects. General fund, it is an annual budget, so you want to do this process every single year. You want to estimate your revenues that are coming in and look at what type of expenditures you anticipate going out. So where we are in the budgeting process for the general fund, we've got a really, really good idea of what resources we're looking at. So we know that with property tax and property values, if we tax a certain percentage on the value of property, we know that if values increase and we keep our millage rate the same, then we can also anticipate an increased amount of property taxes. So where we are in the process right now is we've identified what resources we have, we know what revenue that we're working with, and now we're saying, okay, what can we afford to do? What are our priorities? Let's look at that budget survey that we talked about, and see what kind of initiatives that we have. And I don't know if you've heard just recently that the governor had signed and approved the amended state budget, which allowed for $2,000 supplements to be paid this year to all teachers. So April 1st, all teachers, as well as all staff this time are getting paid an additional $2,000. And that is going to be permanent for teachers next year. So when we're doing that budget process, we have to say, okay, what are our revenues? We know that next year we have to account for at least, at a minimum, $2,000 increases to teacher salaries. And then we say, what else can we do? And what else can we afford to do? And a lot of those initiatives and values are defined and derived from our board members. So we look to them to, you know, kind of set the tone, set the bar, as well as reaching out to staff members, students, and kind of collectively developing those values and what we're going to strategize and spend money on next year.
So about how much public input is put in on the budget?
There are multiple stages of that budget input. So throughout the year, we are gaining insights from the board. At every single board meeting, you've got an opportunity to go and speak. We take that input from community members as well as responses and directives from the board. One of the straight up directives that we have this year is we want to increase our lowest paid employees to at a minimum $12.50 an hour. So at a bare minimum, that's one of the priorities that we have for next year's budget. And so that's going to be the first thing that we're working on with salaries, is increasing all salaries to at least $12.50 per hour. The other forms of input that you can have, that budget survey that we talked about, that's one of them that we have used. The other thing that we really want to use to develop our budget is our strategic plan. And those strategic plans typically occur every 3 years. And when developing a strategic plan, you want to gain input from community members, stakeholders throughout the district. And right now we are in year 2 of our 3-year strategic plan. So we already have an existing strategic plan to kind of back up and support and almost give us a direction on our budget priorities.
So I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned in one of your earlier answers about a survey. I actually got to be a part of that survey.
Yes.
But earlier, well, that wasn't earlier. But when we were talking outside before we got on air, you mentioned that the results of that survey had been gathered together in a way that could possibly be read out on air. So if you wouldn't mind, could you please share the results of that survey and kind of break that down?
I would love to do that. Unfortunately, I don't have it memorized. But we have published that on our website. So if you get an opportunity to go out to the Clarke County website and you go to departments, business services, and then there's a budget tab on there. The very first link that you come to is the results of that budget survey.
About how many people took that budget survey that we're talking about?
We would like to have more input, but there was 60 responses. So we got some responses from board members. We've got 9 board members. We also have principals and directors that took the survey. Students as well as LSGT members all were given opportunities to take that budget survey.
Where can people find the link to the survey? I don't know if you mentioned that, but if our viewers wanted to participate, would that be possible? And where could they find that?
So for FY23, the one that's coming up, that budget survey was closed. I think we pushed it back to early February, but we do have the results of that survey posted. We have it in a dashboard that's available to view. Next year we'll do the same process, pushing it out for stakeholders. That'll start somewhere in the late December, early January timeframe.
All right, awesome. And on that note, we're going to take a quick commercial break and be right back with you.
Welcome back to Education Matters. You're still here with Samaya Stone,
McKenna Mincy,
And Destiny Walker.
and we are still talking with Mr. Shuenerman, who is the Chief Financial Officer over the CCSD. But before we jump into our third segment, we are going to have our history fact by McKenna.
This is your History Fact of the Week, sponsored by Summerhill Baptist Church. This week's History Fact is on Black women and their role in women's history. As we know, March is nationally known as Women's History Month. However, many don't know that is followed by a lesser-known Black Women's History Month in April. This month is represented by the black orchid, a flower associated with authority and power. This holiday is celebrated across the globe in order to honor the unique roles of women of African descent in feminism and leadership due to their identities as double minorities. Even at the center of the women's suffrage movement, discrimination was present. In 1913, during one of the largest marches of the women's suffrage movement, Black women were asked to march in the back rather than intermingled with their white counterparts. Interactions like these are cause for Black Women's History Month, which celebrates uniquely the roles of Black women in history. And that is your History Fact of the Week, sponsored by Summerhill Baptist Church, located at 4841 Jefferson River Road, where Pastor Isaiah Ellison and the congregation invite you to worship with them every Sunday. And please don't forget to celebrate Black Women's History Month in April.
Thank you, McKenna. Jumping into our third segment. In our previous segment, we were talking about budgeting, things that you do. What is the budget plan for the 2022-23 school year?
We are currently deep into this process. It's actually, if you think about a year lasting 12 months, the budgeting process in anticipation of those 12 months takes about 7 months. So we're opening up our budgeting platform typically in October for the July 1st next year. So we have gone through, worked with all of the various departments, identified their operational expenditures. Right now we are looking at personnel. So we have allotments for all positions throughout the district. So we've got teaching positions, counseling positions, principals, assistant principals, media specialists, kindergarten teachers, all the way through your front desk personnel. So we're looking at all of those different positions at all of the different facilities and cost centers throughout the district, and making sure that we have accurate counts and accurate dollar amounts for their salaries and benefits in order to accurately cost and predict what our budget is going to be for the next year. So right now, where we are at currently is just refining who and which positions we're going to be budgeting for next year. So once we have a firm grasp on that, and where we'll kind of flip the switch in the next week or so, is once you know exactly who you're budgeting for, then you can kind of throw different scenarios out there. Like, okay, what is it going to cost if we give teachers $2,000 raises? What's it going to cost if we bring everybody up to $12.50 per hour? You know, what's it going to cost if we give everyone a 3% cost of living adjustment? And so that's where we are with the current budget. We do have a pretty good feeling for our operational type of expenditures when you're thinking about electricity, water, fuel for buses, anything of that nature. We got a pretty good solid grasp of it. So now the next thing that we're looking at is, what do our people cost? And to do that, A, you've got to know which people you're budgeting for, and then B, what type of changes are you going to do with salaries? So we've been working very much with our human resources, kind of looking at those salary tables and what kind of things we can do with those salary tables to either incentivize existing employees, attract employees from other districts, and also keep employees at the district. You know, we really want to reward those that have been with us for a while. We're looking at extending how many years they can continue to step upwards from 20 years to 22 years. You know, teachers maxed out on the salary schedule after 20 years. We're looking at pushing that out to 22 to 24 years as well, to reward those longtime employees. And right now we're in a very fortunate position when in terms of revenue and resources that we have never been in a district. So we've got increased property taxes coming in. We've got ESSER, we've got CARES Act, ARP funds. We've got a healthy fund balance, which are all putting us in a pretty solid position to make some big changes with our organization. So in a nutshell, identifying positions, next costing out different scenarios. April 14th, we're going to give our first budget presentation to the board. At that point, we don't have to have all the I's dotted and T's crossed, but we want to have a good concept, a good kind of a recommendation of where we're going with this budget. It'll sit on the table for a week before we have a called board meeting with the board on April 21st. They're going to be able to dig through all the documentation that we provide them, prepare any kind of questions that they have for any follow-up on that April 21st meeting. And as long as everything goes to plan, the budget is presented kind of in its finale, in its final form in May. Once it's presented to the board in May in its final form, they tentatively approve it. And then you have to go out to the voters, and you have to go out to the community and say, hey, this is what we're doing with your tax dollars. Are we increasing taxes? If so, then you have to have public board hearings, public input meetings, and you also have to advertise this budget. And if all goes as planned, it will be adopted at the June board meeting, ready to be in place for a July 1 start of the fiscal year.
Do you have a budget for after-school resources and activities such as sports, clubs, 21st century, and etc.?
Mm-hmm. So, after-school programming,
Yes.
that's going to be, when we think about after-school programming, typically it is a self-sustaining program. So when you think about self-sustaining, you got to have enough revenues to keep up with the amount of expenditures that you have. And this year, we actually had to increase the wages to stay competitive for all of our after-school workers. And we didn't want to increase the burden on parents. So one of the things is we look towards our ARP money and our CARES Act money that I had mentioned to help kind of offset some of that additional cost. So parents are paying the exact same amount for their children to attend after-school programming, and we're offsetting that additional cost with some of those ESSER funds. But overall, though, it is a self-sustaining program. Revenues have to equal expenditures and vice versa. Now, athletics, that's kind of a whole different animal. And really at the central office, we deal very little with athletics, and there's state law that kind of restricts us from including any of our tax-derived resources to help sustain any athletic programs at all. So the athletic program budget, that's going to be something that's mostly at the school level, and really any kind of receipts that you have from games and any other kind of sales or fundraising activities. Those are used to buy uniforms, pay for equipment, pay for referees, pay for security, stuff of that nature that we can't use tax dollars for. They have to be funded actually from fees that are collected.
So this is a quick clarifying question because you're getting at something that might blur in people's minds a little bit. So my question is, does your department determine individual school budgets, or is that left up to someone completely different?
Believe it or not, we do very little when it comes to actual school budgets. So what we do is we provide principals allocations. So general fund resources, well, first off, we take care of all of the salaries and benefits. We take care of all of the facility expenditures. So, building, constructing, the electricity, the water, anything that goes into operating a school building. So the other kind of expenditures that you think about that principals would control is buying supplies for classrooms, buying media supplies. And so what we do is we provide an allocation that it's based off of a student count at that school. So the principal will receive an allocation. They also get money from Title I. That's more based on need, not just student count. And then they put that into one pot. And then it's up to those principals to kind of identify and prioritize where they want to spend those funds. And although we oversee it, we don't technically enforce them to create a big giant budget. We just have an allocation for them, and then they can move money between different object codes or different line items in order to spend on what they need at their facility. They also have access to LSGT mini grants as well as their principal account funds, which is kind of like, school-derived resources.
Does the district ever face consequences, or rather, would the district face any consequences if there were to be some unethical things happening with money at individual school levels?
I have to say the tone starts at the top, and it sets a precedent for every employee in the organization. So we have what's called a financial accounting business services manual. And if you look at it, you want to print it out, it's about 160 pages that defines almost every single procedure when it comes to money in the district. So anywhere from assets to payroll to accounts payable, the handling of cash and receipts at games, it's all well defined and tested on an annual basis. We've got an internal auditor that goes around from school to school. She has this manual, and she actually looks at what they're doing at the school just to ensure and make sure that they're doing the procedures that we've kind of set out for them, right? And that kind of goes back to being an auditor and knowing what they're looking for, and you want to have safe control set up so that it's not easy for people to either take money or steal from the district. So there definitely are consequences. It's set at the top and enforced by auditing.
And I thank you so much for that clarification. As we were mentioning, I am a member of the Superintendent Student Advisory Council this year, and what I have learned through meeting all of our chief officers throughout the district is that a lot of the things that people, they come forward and they complain about this and they complain about that to the district, I have learned that a lot of these things are not really in the hands of the district. We think we can climb up the ladder and get to a certain point, but a lot of these things don't fall in the laps of the district, they fall in the laps of the individual schools. So thank you so much for clarifying that.
And on that note, we'll take a quick commercial break and be right back with you. Welcome back to Education Matters. You're still here with Samaya Song,
McKenna Mincy.
And Destiny Walker.
We are still talking with Mr. Shuenerman, who is the Chief Financial Officer over the Clarke County School District. Before we hop into our fourth and last segment, we will have our 2-Year Health by Destiny.
This is your 2-Year Health segment sponsored by Drug-Free Items. A diet rich in vegetables and fruits can lower blood pressure, reduce the risk of heart disease and smoke, prevent types of cancer, lower risk of eye and digestive problems, and have a positive effect upon blood sugar, which can help keep appetite in check. Eating non-starchy vegetables and fruits like apples, pears, and green leafy vegetables may even promote weight loss. This was your 2-Year Health segment sponsored by Drug-Free Items.
All right. This is a question that I have had since the beginning of the show itself. So, from what you have talked about throughout the entire show, what I'm seeing is there are a lot of connections. Your role requires you to do a lot of networking because essentially you all have to do the numbers for what everyone else decides is how they want to go forward. So I wanted to kind of ask about your connections when it comes to recruitment and operations, because I also got to speak with the chief officers of those departments as well: human resources, projects director, operations, academics, all of those. I have spoken with them, and it seems that there's a lot of overlap there. So how is it kind of having to accommodate essentially the ideas of other departments? Because of course that costs money. So
That's a great observation. I gotta say, very, very, very good. Money touches everything, right? And it's very personal. So when you talk about people's money, you talk about salaries and the money that they take home, if you get it wrong, you're going to hear about it. And what I found, working on this end, not auditing, but coming in and actually in the operations of the school system, money does touch everything. So whether it's people or operating a athletic program, or if it's operating a business services department, or if it's taking kids home from schools on a school bus, you gotta figure out how to pay for that school bus. You gotta figure out how to pay for the fuel that's in there. What kind of insurance do you have for those school buses? Your devices. I'm sure you guys all have devices, Chromebooks. I just got a quote that we're looking at refreshing all student devices next year. $3.4 million, right? So we're looking at replacing all student devices. So not only does it touch the employees and different departments, it also impacts the kids. And it is very interesting, right? So it's not just, hey, you deal with money, you work in a silo. It's having to, like you said, work across departments. Figuring out what those different initiatives and big ideas are that people have throughout the district. Seeing what the superintendent and board's appetite is to fund some of those big initiatives. And that's some of the work that we have to do a year in advance, looking at the budget and plan for those things. But yeah, absolutely. Money is integrated in pretty much every aspect of the organization. And like you said, people through human resources, both Selena Blankenship, the Chief Human Resources, and Dan Schwartz, I think you had him on air within the last couple weeks. We really want to make sure that it's attractive to come work at CCSD, especially in those high need positions. How do we attract them? Money is just one of the tools that we can use. When people leave and they get those exit surveys and say, hey, why are you leaving CCSD? Money is one of those things that hopefully we can correct for. And surprisingly, it is not on the top of the list for why people leave CCSD. So we do try to make it rewarding and competitive. We can't be the top payer in the state. You know, we've got to compete with other school systems like Walton County, which are in our area, and Walton County has to compete with Gwinnett. So like they've got to be one step ahead of us, and every time we try to catch up to what they're paying teachers, what they're paying staff, they make one additional step to be closer to Gwinnett County. So I don't know where I was going, but overall.
It's like that.
No, I
sometimes.
completely get it. You hear
Yeah.
that sentiment of trying to compete with Atlanta and larger counties
Yeah.
near us. You hear that a lot, so I definitely get that.
So overall, great observation. Money touches everything. It's involved with staffing. It's involved with every department. You know, whether or not you can do something or not do something. A lot of times it hinges on, can we afford to do it? You know, looking at not just this year, can we afford doing it next year? Can we afford doing it 5 years down the road? You know, like if we're gonna increase teacher salaries by $2,000 and then give them an additional 5%, can we afford doing that for 5 years? So we gotta kind of model that out. So it is all just, yeah, I mean, like you said, pretty much weaving that together, hearing people out, networking with your peers throughout the district, and hopefully coming up with a budget and being responsible with the taxpayer dollars, and paying for stuff that is kind of, we can all hopefully have some sort of shared collective agreeance on what we're spending money on. That's really the goal. And my goal as a chief financial officer is to stay out of the headlines, right? I don't want to be in the news. I want to be able to operate smoothly and effectively and not have any hiccups that are going to cause a bunch of, you know, commotion. And I know that there's a lot of push for increased wages, and I can promise you that's something that we look at every single budget, you know, especially now. At this stage in the game, that's one thing that we're really looking at and diving into is how do we increase wages, not just throughout the district, but specifically for those jobs that you know, make $15 or less per hour. How can we really increase those to get them up to a living wage?
I have a question, because like you said, you touch everything from your department. And sometimes the resources aren't there. So what's the toughest part about telling somebody no?
Really got to tell people no every day. You know, and first starting this role back in Bolton, that was one of the challenging aspects of the job is being put in a position where you have to say no, and it's something that I've kind of had to grow with professionally. Even at our last cabinet meeting that we had, I felt like I was the no man, you know, because you do have all these aspirational goals, and really, I don't want to be the stick in the mud, but a lot of times my position is can we do that? You know, can we realistically do it and afford to do it and sustain it? And so a lot of times I will take the super conservative approach and kind of be that counterbalance when it comes to any kind of initiative that we have, just being really conservative because we don't want to get this wrong. Telling individuals no is challenging too, especially like I said, when it comes to money, when it comes to people's pocketbooks, it's very emotional. So that's something that has taken time, and I don't think anyone's perfect at it, right? So it's really about hearing people out, what they have to say, and kind of coming at them in a very analytical approach. If the answer is not yes, explaining to them why. And I think really if you can explain the why and your thought process behind the why, typically they're okay with it.
How frequent is that clash between human empathy, just feeling what other people feel, putting yourself in their shoes, and realism, logic, analytics, all the things that you talked about? Because from what you said, I see kind of an overlap. You talk about how within your role, you are always interacting with people, and yet your end result has to represent numbers. So how is that clash for you?
It's not just analytic, black and white. Like I said, in this role, we do have an accounting manual that defines a lot of our procedures. And some of the challenges come within my own department. You know, they're abiding by this set, you know, established procedures and rule books, and that we can't live in a world where, I think Dr. Thomas always says, we can't let perfect be the enemy of good. And so at sometimes you have to make the call to, whether it's empathy or whether it's, emotions. It's not always, well, the book says no, we can't do it, period, end of story. You have to look at it and say, operationally, does that make sense? Is what that other person coming and either expressing a concern about or complaining about, like, do they have a valid point, right? And so a lot of times you have to go back and reanalyze why stuff is the way that it is, and not be in a position where you can never change your mind, and you can't go back on something that is already established. And one of the things that I guess as an auditor, just because that's the way it was done in the past, that does not mean that's the way it should be done, or that's the way that is the right way to do it. And so you kind of have to be open to other people's perspectives and how that might impact or influence you to change the way you do business.
Since you talk about being open and seeing other people's perspectives, what do you feel like is one of the biggest risks you've had to take being in your position?
I think we're at it right now, honestly. With the budget, we are sitting in a place where historically we have not been in recent history. With a healthy fund balance, we're looking at very strong revenues. Clarke County, we've taxed at 20 mills, which is the highest allowed in Georgia, since before 2000. I mean, it's been a long, long time at 20 mills. So we're looking at property values increasing at least 12%. We're looking at increased money from the state. You know, we're no longer being assessed austerity. So with the additional revenue streams, with our healthy fund balance that we really have an opportunity to make some big strides. It makes me nervous, you know, to open up the checkbook and say, hey, we're going to pay all of our staff more money. And we're going to not only promise to pay them more money next year, but this is permanent. You know, and being in a position where you really want to be certain that you're making the right decision and not kind of painting yourself into a corner. That's something that I kind of struggle with on a day-to-day basis, because I have to say my personality is a little bit more conservative, and my fellow cabinet members often push me out of my comfort zone, just like we had talked the other day, you know, about certain wage increases and what's that going to mean for the pocketbook going forward.
Okay, and for the last question, why does education matter?
All right, that is a complex question. I did take some notes. You know, I think education, bottom line, is the ultimate equalizer. You probably had people say that before. Teaches you some life skills, whether it's going on to college or whether it's having you know, a career in the trades. Really, I think education matters because it provides a framework to the rest of your life. And in short, I really feel like our job is to provide those tools and the ability to get an education. Everyone's not going to take advantage of it. You can try and try and try to push and encourage as many students to take advantage of it, but really our goal is just to make sure that those structures are in place for success for students.
Thank you for listening to Education Matters, the official voice of the youth. Education Matters is sponsored by the Clarke County School District, Ellison's Professional Services, and MeURadioAthens.com. If you missed any portion of this program or would like to hear it again, it can be heard Monday at 5:30 or Thursday at 10 a.m. on MeURadioAthens.com or play on demand from our YouTube channel, Education Matters Network. Education Matters is a production of the High School Completion Initiative, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye.